So
I think it was 6 weeks. It's been a long time.
okay. Just thinking about that training, that 6 weeks of drill sergeant training. But what really stands out? One of the more important things you got out of that training as a drill
Things
sergeant?
that I had taken for granted. Things that I had taken for granted. Like when we would have to run a mile, the amount of fellows that would fall out because they were tired, I had taken for granted that everybody could do that. And the instruction that we would have to do, some people were so nervous they could hardly speak in front of we'd have the people come in and critique your class and that. And guys would, the night before, we would have trained in the billets. And they would do pretty well. But then when they would get in front of the class to talk, they'd get nervous. And we started out with something like 33 people, and I think we graduated 17, something like that.
Okay.
And there was no excuse for it. The guys just got nervous, or they were heavy smokers and couldn't do the physical part of it.
Okay. All right. So now you're headed toward Vietnam. I assume you went to California to.
When I left Fort Bliss, Texas, they sent me to Fort Eustis, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
To be a stevedore supervisor. Before that, I had no idea what a stevedore was.
So, but you had finished your drill sergeant training.
Oh yeah, I was drill sergeant about 8 months.
Okay. Yeah, all of it at Fort Bliss.
At Fort Bliss, Texas.
And you went to Fort Eustis, which is a transportation school,
right?
Obviously. And they were changing your MOS at that time?
Right.
Wow.
They needed stevedore supervisors, and so I guess they were getting them from wherever they decided they would get them from. And one day I was sitting in the office, and they came in and said, "Hey, Sergeant Wilson, you're going to Fort Eustis, Virginia, to be a stevedore supervisor." Oh yeah, what's a stevedore? And so they sent me to stevedore school in Fort Eustis, and it was supposed to be a 19-week course. They cut it down to 16 because they said they needed them so desperately in Vietnam. And then when I got to Vietnam, by this time I think I had like 9, 10 years in the service. When I got to Vietnam, the CO, Captain Major Rohrbach, called me in the office, and he says, "We're going to make you the motor sergeant." I've been to stevedore school. They need them so desperately. The major calls me in the office. He said, "We're going to make you the motor sergeant." I said, "I don't know anything about being a motor sergeant, And he says, "I see in your records you went to Wheelville Mechanic School." Well, that had been 1956, and now it's 67. And they'd sent me from the missile site, from the motor pool initially to the gun site in 56. I hadn't seen the motor pool since. And he said, he gave me an argument I couldn't say anything to. He says, "You're an NCO, I'm going to give you the mechanics." End of story, so.
Okay. Now, let's say while you're at Fort Eustis for those 16 weeks, so what is a stevedore, and what did you learn?
It's a person that loads and offloads ships.
Okay.
And make sure, of course, that there are safety factors in that.
Okay. All right. So now you're in Vietnam, and they're changing you back to the motor pool.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it turned out to be a real good job. It's one of those deals where you don't know when you got gravy coming at you, and it turned out to be a real good deal. I turned out to be a real good motor sergeant. I didn't have the mechanical wherewithal because it had been so long, but I was able to supervise, and I got along good with the men. And when I got there, we had a deadline rate of 90%. We had vehicles everywhere that were not running for very silly reasons. If it needed a, say, carburetor, and there was no carburetors in the there were no carburetors in the supply room, then the vehicle would be deadlined. Well, in what they called the retrograde area, there were vehicles lined up like from here. The place must have been 2 miles deep with vehicles. that were deadlined to go back to Hawaii to be repaired.
Okay.
You weren't supposed to fool around with those to get parts
Right.
to fix other vehicles. Well, I would take my crew at night and go in there and take whatever part I needed to repair the vehicles that were down. And so my deadline rate went way down.
Okay.
And I just, I think everybody was on to me.
Oh, okay.
But because the vehicles were running and everything was fine, everybody was wink, wink.
Sure, sure.
There was no actual stealing going on, but you were not supposed to take parts off the vehicles that were down.
Sure, I got you.
So I would go in there at night with my crew, we'd take what we need, and so everything was running just great.
Okay. All right. But did you face any combat?
Well, yeah, I was there during the Tet Offensive, and
And where were you actually stationed in Vietnam? Which city?
Long Binh.
Long. Okay.
Yeah, Long Binh, which was about 20 miles from a place called Newport, the port.
Okay.
And we would convoy every morning from Long Binh down to Newport.
Okay.
And my motor pool was right there on the pier.
Okay.
And during the Tet Offensive, I'm sure you know, there was no front line. We had missiles, whether mortar and rockets, and people assaulting the perimeter just about every night during the Tet Offensive. Biggest mistake I ever made in my life, I was showing one of my Vietnamese workers. I had 75 Vietnamese workers, about maybe 20 GIs. And I was showing one of the Vietnamese workers how to work a rough terrain forklift. Where I was sitting at was not a seat. He was in the seat, and I'm riding here. He's here in the seat of the forklift. Well, mortar started to come in, and he hit the brake, and the vehicle slammed to a stop. The fork extended and then closed from the... Well, I slipped off from where I was sitting, and my foot slipped into the beam and caught my foot in there and dislocated my toe. And I pulled to try to get my foot out. Well, so finally I had to reach back, and I pulled the lever and extended the boom. And I was able to jump and run then. Well, I got evacuated from Vietnam to Fort Zama, Japan. And while I was there were guys around me that were really terribly injured. I had a dislocated toe.
Sure.
And had a colonel come by, and he's telling all the fellows the same thing, gonna get you a Purple Heart, and so on and so on. And he came to me, and the guy next to me had like his whole face gone. His nose had just little holes where he'd been in an APC, and he got blown out of it, and it just tore all this off, And he says, we're gonna get you a Purple Heart for that toe. And I said, hey, don't even worry about it.